Hello viewers, today we'll be discussing the topic liberal views on capitalism. The entire discussion would be divided into a number of subparts. We would begin with the concept of liberalism, features of liberalism, exponents of liberalism, strands of liberalism. Then we would focus on capitalism, features of capitalism, laissez-faire capitalism, and finally, the contribution of liberal philosophy to capitalist thought. Students, in order to understand the liberal views of capitalism, it is imperative to understand what is liberalism, how did the liberal philosophers facilitate a discussion on the relationship between state and society. Liberalism is an ideology which believes in a coherent vision of how society should be organized. It became the dominant political philosophy in the middle of the 19th century. However, students, it is important to distinguish between the different stands of liberalism depending on the century in which the expression was used. In the 18th century and the 19th century, liberalism was denoted as classical liberalism. In 20th century, it was denoted as welfare liberalism. Then the shift from welfare liberalism to libertarianism or neoliberalism happened in the mid-20th century. The main difference between classical liberalism, welfare liberalism, and neoliberalism is on the extent of government action. The core features of classical liberalism are liberty of the individual citizens and the commitment to free markets and free trade, which are seen as the best way to organize economic life of the citizens. Let us now start with what is liberalism and what does this concept denote. Liberalism is a principle in politics which insists on liberty of the individual as the first and foremost goal of public policy. In other words, liberalism stresses on absence of restraints on individual. This principle evolved in the West in the late 17th century in order to liquidate feudal privileges in the land-owning class and to create favorable conditions for the new entrepreneurial class to enable them to contribute to societal progress and development. Let us now move on to the core features of liberalism. Firstly, liberalism emphasizes on the fact that man is a rational creature and man has the ability to contribute to social progress as well as self-development. Secondly, there is no basic contradiction between an individual self-interest and the common interest. Man is endowed with certain natural rights which cannot be transgressed by any authority. Civil society and state are artificial institutions created by individuals in order to serve their common interest. The next feature of liberalism focuses on the fact that public policy should be the result of free bargaining between individuals in order to pursue their common interest. Liberalism promotes civil liberties of the individuals, such as freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, association, freedom of religion, belief, to name a few. Legal and social restrictions on these individual freedoms should be meant to ensure similar and equal freedoms for others. Therefore, individuals should be left free to pursue their own freedoms, and curtailment of the freedom should come only when others should be entitled to enjoy similar freedoms. Liberalism upholds freedom of contract or agreement. No individual can accept any obligation without his own consent and without consideration of mutual benefit. The state would function as an umpire in the enforcement of contracts. However, a contract concluded under pressure and which compromises the dignity of the individual should be regarded as void. Students, let us now try to understand what is a liberal state. Liberalism upholds market society as the basis of social organization and believes that the role of the state should be confined to fulfillment of basic minimum functions like maintenance of law and order, protection of rights of the individuals, and ensuring that contracts of individuals are not violated. The liberals believe that the state is a necessary evil. They feel that that state is the best which governs the least. Liberalism treats the state as the means and the individual as an end. It rates out the absolute authority of the state. So the state is a minimalist state, and the state should not interfere in market regulations or market activities. Let us now study the early exponents of liberalism. The early exponents of liberalism include John Locke, Adam Smith, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill. All of them were English philosophers. John Locke is considered to be the father of liberalism. Adam Smith is considered to be the father of economics. Jeremy Bentham is considered to be the founder of utilitarianism, which is a strand of liberalism. All of them defended the principle of laissez-faire, which implies least interference of the state in economic affairs of the individual. These are the founders of classical liberalism, and classical liberalism is also called negative liberalism because it contemplates a negative role of the state in the sphere of mutual interaction of individuals. In the 20th century, Herbert Spencer, an English philosopher, sought to reaffirm negative liberalism through the application of the principles of natural science to social organization. John Stuart Mill, an English philosopher, sought to modify utilitarianism and the principle of laissez-faire on philosophical grounds, which paved the way for the development of the theory of welfare state. T.H. Green, another English philosopher, sought to add a moral dimension to liberalism, and he advanced a full-fledged theory of the liberal state. These traditions were further developed by L.T. Hobhouse, Harold Laski, R.H. Tawney, all of them being English philosophers. Thus, the theory and practice of welfare state flourished in the first half of the 20th century in England. This theory contemplates a positive role of the state in securing a dignified life for the individuals. Hence, welfare liberalism is also called positive liberalism. Let us move on to the various facets of liberalism. On the political side, liberalism promotes democracy. On the economic side, liberalism promotes capitalism. Democracy is concerned with the fulfillment of needs and aspirations of the people, but capitalism results in the concentration of economic power in the hands of a chosen few, which may be against the interest of the vast majority of ordinary people. Based on these formulations, let us now try to understand the two very important strands of liberalism. The first one is individualism and the second one is utilitarianism. What is individualism and what does individualism promote? As the name suggests, individualism speaks about individual autonomy or rights and freedoms of the individuals. It rests on the premise that individuals are rational creatures who have the capability to carry on their aspirations and fulfill their needs and demands. It believes that individual dignity, existence, judgment should be given full recognition in almost all public policies and state decisions. According to this view, only an individual can have rights. Family, trade unions, corporations, or the states cannot have any rights which could be distinguished from the rights of individual members of the society. Similarly, individualism also stresses the fact that no social unit can have any interest which could be distinguished from the interest of the individual members. Individualism supports a social and legal system which is based on voluntary interactions between individuals. This view strongly upholds the society model and holds that even taxation should be confined to the provision and maintenance of common services. John Locke and Adam Smith are considered to be the exponents of individualism. Coming to the second strand of liberalism is utilitarianism. Jeremy Bentham is considered to be the main advocate of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is based on the principle of the greatest good of the greatest number. It believes that the purpose of the state is to ensure that the large majority of the population is kept happy, and therefore, happiness, they believe, is the balance between pleasure and pain derived from various goods and services, acts and policies of the government. Jeremy Bentham very interestingly noted that nature has placed mankind under the control of two sovereign masters. They are pleasure and pain. All of us want to maximize our pleasures and minimize pain. Moral principles and state policies, according to Bentham, should aim at promoting greater happiness and minimizing pain among individuals. Bentham made no distinction between the qualities of different pleasure. What he advocated was that the state should try to maximize pleasure of individuals. Let us now come to another exponent of liberalism, and that is John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill pointed out certain qualitative differences between different types of pleasures, and therefore he advocated the fact that since individuals have different traits, they should not be given uniform treatment. However, he projected the fact that liberty of the individual should be given maximum value. The modifications in utilitarianism in the later half of the 19th century led towards individualism and transformed the basic character of utilitarianism. Mill observed that taxation of the rich for the benefit of the poor would pave the way for the welfare state. Let us now try to understand if there is any relationship between liberalism and economy. Classical liberalism draws on the economic science of Adam Smith. In The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith argued that individual work and free trade achieved through the operation of the individual hand is the best way to advance the wealth of a nation. He also argued that an optimal social state is created through barter and exchange of free individual and natural order together with individual freedom. A perfectly competitive market economy will determine a Pareto's optimally competitive equilibrium outcome. However, Smith also argued that given limited resources, there can be no outcome where all the members of the society will be better off. However, what he advocated was a freely competitive market system. Liberalism holds that there are certain individual liberties which are of fundamental political significance. These liberties are fundamental or basic because these are the preconditions for the pursuit of other freedoms, pursuit of other social values such as economic efficiency, promoting general welfare, moderating the degree of inequality and distribution of income and growth. None of these liberties are absolute. But the reasons for limiting the exercise of these liberties to protect the basic liberties of other individuals. Liberals, however, agree that among the basic liberties that we ought to give importance to are freedom of thought, expression, freedom of inquiry, freedom of conscience, association, security of the person, and most importantly, freedom to choose our own occupation. They also agree that right to hold personal property is a part of the freedom of a person, since control over personal belongings and security of one's own space is necessary for individuals' independence and a sense of self-respect. Where liberals primarily disagree is on the nature and status of economic rights and liberties, including the extent of the freedom of contract, right to private property in land, raw materials, and other productive resources. Classical liberals generally hold that economic liberties are to be regarded and guaranteed as among the basic liberties to be enjoyed by all individuals. Now, these are not just strict basic liberties, because economic liberties would also include basic liberties. Freedom of contract, right to property are not absolute rights according to classical liberals. There can be certain restrictions according to the needs of time. Let us now try to understand what is capitalism. What does it advocate, and what is the relationship between capitalism and liberalism? Capitalism is an economic system which is mainly organized around private ownership of means of production and distribution. Competition in a free market determines the prices of goods and commodities. Thirdly, capitalism focuses on the fact that almost all wealth is privately owned. Fourthly, capitalism focuses on the fact that state involvement should be confined to market exchanges, production, and transaction. Production, distribution, and management of wealth are controlled by corporations or private companies. Such social and economic system is based on the acknowledgement and primacy of individual rights and the right to own and acquire property. The purest form of capitalism is free market. Emphasis is put on individual achievements rather than on the quality of production. Politically, it is considered to be a system of laissez-faire. Now, liberal capitalism is also called laissez-faire capitalism. It rejects the idea of government control over the economy and instead of it puts the focus on individuals. In other words, laissez-faire system focuses on the free operation of the market and individual autonomy in the market. On the economic spectrum, laissez-faire capitalism is a right-wing ideology that is fundamentally based on private ownership, competition, free trade, self-reliance, self-interest, and the principles of supply and demand. Competition is considered to be one of the central principles of laissez-faire system. Under mercantilism, the government controlled the means of production and therefore there was little or no competition. However, laissez-faire capitalism introduces the idea that individuals and businesses should compete with one another and their success should be determined by the market forces of supply and demand. Free trade is considered to be the basis of laissez-faire capitalism. It is the idea that companies and individuals should be allowed to carry out their business without any interference from the government and the state. In general, the government intervenes in the economy, we know, and that form of government interference can be seen through the form of various taxation policies, where the government collects both from individual citizens as well as companies. And these taxes are entitlements of the government from the business enterprises. For example, government collects several forms of taxes, including income tax on individuals, sales tax on purchases, corporate taxes on companies, and tariffs on goods and services traded between countries. The principle of free trade holds that these forms of taxation should be abolished or limited to allow the economy to operate on its own without any interference from the state. Laissez-faire capitalists argue that it would create more economic activities in terms of more trade, and it would create more wealth within a given economic system, hence contribute to the prosperity of the country in the long run. Self-reliance is considered to be the basic premise of laissez-faire capitalism. It is the idea that individuals should be responsible for their own well-being and should not rely on the government for any kind of assistance. For example, in a model capitalist state, the government provides many social welfare programs to assist citizens. In other words, state welfare is based on the premise that it is the duty of the state to provide for several assistance programs to the needy and underdeveloped segments of the population in the country. A social program is a government-funded program which is generally provided to the citizens of the country at the cost of the state. There are many elements of social programs formulated by welfare countries such as old age pension, some form of government-funded healthcare, public education, welfare, public distribution system, etc., so on and so forth. However, laissez-faire capitalism is in favor of people being responsible for themselves and not being dependent on the state for any kind of help and social care and assistance. Therefore, the government should not intervene in economic affairs in order to provide public assistance. It was argued that self-reliance would push individuals to work harder and would therefore benefit the society more as a whole. Self-reliance would also contribute to more individual prosperity and better economic prosperity of the country as a whole. Coming to the liberal philosophy and its contribution to capitalism. Liberals generally, and more specifically the classical liberals, maintain that when markets break down due to monopolistic concentration of market power, or when markets are incapable of adequately supplying goods or services that are important to individual independence and well-being, it is the government's role to intervene and address such externalities by restoring competition and providing for these public goods. In other words, government will intervene where individuals are unable to provide for themselves. Liberalism arose for the protection of the interest of the capitalist class when political power was wielded by the feudal class. In the early phase, liberalism stood for limiting the powers of the state, and they favored laissez-faire individualism, which provided for minimum government, minimum regulation, and what we call to be a minimalist state. In pleading for this policy, liberals advocated the fact that the freedom of the property-owning class should be set aside and property should be the basis of all human considerations. Let us now move on to the next important aspect of our discussion, and that is the contribution of liberalism to the development of capitalist thought. The greatest merit of liberalism lies in initiating the process of replacing traditionalism by modern rationalism. It asserted the fact that socio-economic relations of men in society, which were otherwise and hitherto based on tradition, should now be based on reason. In other words, reason should replace tradition. Since this process was started by the new middle class, the merchants and the industrialists, they were the first to benefit from this change, obviously. Feudalism was replaced by capitalism not only in the economic sphere, but there was a corresponding change in the political system altogether. And we need to agree with the fact that this had some evil effects also. The conditions of the working classes deteriorated with the success of classical liberalism because it led to concentration of economic power in the hands of the capitalists. But once the process of defining of social relations from the point of view of reason had started, it could not be stopped since the rise of socialism. Now we find that socialism gave way to another form of social relation between the state and the society. Students, let us now summarize what we have already studied. We started off our discussion with the concept of liberalism, where we found liberalism is a classical philosophy which based on the freedom of the individual from any form of restraint. Then we focused on the various advocates of liberalism, the features of liberalism, the different stands of liberalism in terms of individualism and utilitarianism, and finally we focused on capitalism, the liberal view of capitalism, which is mostly called laissez-faire capitalism, and how did the liberals support capitalism in order to carry forth the contribution of individuals to society, where the role of the market should be maximized and the role of the state should be minimized. In one single sentence, we can say that liberalism qualified and supported individual autonomy, individual well-being, self-reliance by focusing more on market than on the role of the state. Thank you.